You didn't choose your beliefs, they were handed to you before you were old enough to question them, before you had the language to push back, before you even understood that pushing back was an option. And right now, at this very moment, every decision you think you're making freely, your career path, your relationship patterns, your daily habits, your private fears, the ceiling you keep bumping your head against, all of it is being controlled by a framework you never consciously agreed to, never deliberately examined, and in most cases don't even know exists. That is not a metaphor. That is not a motivational opener designed to make you feel temporarily uncomfortable and then forget by the time you scroll your next video. That is the mechanical reality of how human behavior actually operates beneath the surface of everything you call your life. Most people go their entire lives never asking the foundational question, where did this belief come from and does it actually serve me? They inherit a worldview from their parents, absorb it through the culture they grew up inside, have it reinforced daily by the environment surrounding them, and then spend decades working as hard as they possibly can within the walls of a house they never designed and never chose. They optimize the furniture, they redecorate the rooms, they hustle and grind and read books and attend seminars, and none of it fundamentally changes anything because the structure itself remains untouched. Here is what makes this so devastating. The framework is invisible precisely because it feels like reality. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wave a flag and say, "Hello, I am a limiting belief installed in you at age 7 by a parent who was themselves operating inside a broken framework." It just feels like how things are. It feels like common sense. It feels like wisdom. And that feeling, that seamless, unquestioned sense of normalcy, is exactly what makes the invisible framework the most powerful force in your life. Not your discipline, not your talent, not the economy, not your circumstances. The framework, the lens through which you interpret every single thing that happens to you, until you see it, really see it, with cold clarity and unflinching honesty. You will keep getting the same results and calling them fate. You will keep hitting the same ceiling and calling it your limit. You will keep walking in the same circles and calling it balance. The invisible framework is running your life right now. The only question is whether you are going to keep letting it run you unconsciously or whether you are going to do the hardest and most important thing a human being can do. Look directly at the structure that is operating you and decide for the first time whether it deserves to stay. Nothing about your life is random. That feeling of chaos you carry, the sense that things just happen to you, that success shows up for some people and not others without any real logic, that you are somehow always slightly behind where you should be, that feeling is itself part of the framework. Because randomness is a story that protects you from the more uncomfortable truth, which is this: your life has architecture. It has load-bearing walls and foundational columns and invisible blueprints that were drawn long before you ever consciously decided anything about yourself or what you wanted. The architecture is made of mental models, the deep, often unspoken assumptions you carry about how the world works, what kind of person you are, what is possible for someone with your background, your history, your level of education, your family name. These models operate below the level of conscious thought. They are not opinions you hold. They are lenses you see through. And the difference between those two things is everything. An opinion can be updated with new information. A lens distorts the information before it reaches you. You can give someone who carries the wrong mental models all the knowledge, all the tools, all the opportunity in the world, and they will still find a way to produce the same outcome. Because the architecture of their existence is designed to produce that outcome, and knowledge alone does not change architecture. This is why information is not the solution to most people's problems. You already know what you should be doing. You know you should sleep more and eat better and stop procrastinating and be more patient and exercise consistently. You have known all of this for years, and you still don't do it, or you do it briefly and then stop, and then feel ashamed, and then consume more information to feel productive again. The gap is not informational. The gap is structural. And structures are not fixed by adding more content on top of them. They are fixed by going underneath, into the foundation, and examining what is actually holding everything up. Every person you genuinely admire who seems to move through the world with a different kind of gravity, who builds things that last, who recovers from setbacks faster than seems rational, who makes decisions with a clarity that looks almost effortless, is not operating on superior information. They are running a different architecture. Their mental models are built for a different outcome. Their framework allows for things yours currently blocks. The distance between you and the life you want is not a distance of effort, it is a distance of design. And you cannot effort your way out of a structural problem. You have to redesign the structure. Here is the first truth that is going to be uncomfortable, and it should be, because comfortable truths don't change anything. The ceiling you keep hitting, the invisible barrier that stops you from earning more, building more, trusting more, risking more, becoming more, is not your ceiling. It was never your ceiling. It was built by someone else, in someone else's life, in response to someone else's fears, and it was handed to you so seamlessly and so early that you adopted it as your own truth without ever questioning its origin. Think about where your sense of what is financially possible came from. Think about the number in your head that represents what you are realistically allowed to earn, the number above which something in you starts to feel nervous or arrogant or irresponsible. That number did not arrive from logic. It did not emerge from a careful analysis of the market and your skills and your potential. It was set by the household you grew up in, by the conversations that happened around the dinner table, by the way money was spoken about or avoided or feared or hoarded or wasted. You absorbed a financial ceiling before you ever made a single dollar, and every financial decision you have made since has been unconsciously calibrated to stay beneath it. And it is not just money. The ceiling operates in every domain. There is a ceiling on how worthy of love you believe yourself to be, set early by relationships that either validated or damaged your sense of self. There is a ceiling on how ambitious it is acceptable for you to be, set by a culture or community that praised humility and punished what it called arrogance, which was really just confidence that threatened the people around you. There is a ceiling on how much discomfort you believe is necessary before something qualifies as success, shaped by stories of suffering that were told as if struggle were the only legitimate path. Every time you have gotten close to breaking through, in any of these dimensions, something in you has flinched. Not because you couldn't do it, but because the framework said you shouldn't. That flinch is not self-protection. That flinch is a borrowed limit protecting itself. The most disorienting realization you can have is that the ceiling above you was built by people who themselves were living inside ceilings. They weren't trying to limit you, they were simply giving you the map of the world as they understood it. But a map drawn inside a prison only shows you the interior of the prison. To see what's outside, you have to be willing to question whether the map itself is accurate. And that requires the courage to look at your own ceilings with enough clarity to ask, whose belief is this? And what would happen if I simply stopped honoring it? There is a contract you are living under right now. You never signed it. You were never asked whether you agreed to its terms. It was not presented to you as a contract because contracts that are presented can be refused, and this one was never meant to be refused. It was installed. Through years of schooling, through media, through the subtle rewards and punishments of social belonging, through the stories told about who succeeds and who fails and why, you were handed a set of rules for how to exist in the world, and you internalized them so completely that they stopped feeling like rules and started feeling like reality. The surface clauses of this contract sound reasonable enough. Work hard, be honest, treat others with respect, show up consistently. These are not the problem. These are functional principles that support a functional life, and questioning them would be a waste of time. But buried beneath the acceptable clauses are the ones that were designed not to serve you, but to serve the system that produced them. Don't outgrow your station. Don't want more than people like you are supposed to want. Don't make others uncomfortable with your ambition. Be grateful for what you have, even if what you have was decided by forces that never asked for your input. Define success the way it has been defined for you. Chase the metrics you were handed, and above all, do not look too carefully at the structure because the structure benefits from not being examined. Here is what that invisible clause has cost real people in real terms. Brilliant minds that spent 40 years in careers they tolerated because the contract said stability was more important than purpose. Creative people who silenced their most powerful ideas because the contract said practicality was a virtue and dreaming was a luxury. Relationships that were maintained long past their expiration because the contract said commitment meant suffering and leaving meant failure. Entire human lives, full, complicated, unrepeatable human lives, organized around a set of terms that were written by someone who is not them, for a world that no longer exists, in service of an outcome that was never theirs to begin with. The contract is not evil. It is simply indifferent. It does not care about your potential. It does not account for who you actually are beneath the accumulated layers of compliance. It was designed to produce predictable, manageable behavior at scale, and it has been extraordinarily successful at exactly that. The question is not whether the contract served the people who wrote it. It did. The question is whether it serves you. And the moment you ask that question with genuine honesty, the answer becomes difficult to ignore. Stop calling yourself lazy. Stop writing it in your journal as an explanation for why things haven't worked. Stop letting other people use it as a diagnosis for why you haven't reached your potential. Laziness as a character trait, as a fixed, inherent quality of a person, is largely a myth, and more importantly, it is not what is happening to you. The evidence is right there in your own history. You have started things with enormous energy. You have felt that surge of clarity when a new idea arrives and suddenly the world seems full of possibility. You have pulled late nights on projects that mattered to you. You have shown up again and again for the things that genuinely resonated. That is not the behavior of a lazy person. That is the behavior of someone who is misaligned. Misalignment is what happens when your actions and your internal framework point in different directions. When you are trying to build something that, beneath the surface, you don't fully believe you deserve. When you are chasing a goal that was handed to you by someone else's expectation, instead of one that emerged from your own authentic understanding of what your life is for. When the vision you are working toward and the identity you carry about yourself are fundamentally incompatible, because the identity says you are the kind of person who almost succeeds, and no amount of effort can long outlast an identity that is working against it. The brain does not resist hard work. The brain resists work that conflicts with its operating model. When your framework believes that success brings danger, that visibility invites criticism, that abundance creates guilt, that outperforming your peers damages belonging, it will manufacture resistance at every point of traction. It will make you tired precisely when you should push forward. It will generate urgent distractions exactly when focus matters most. It will produce a fog of indecision at the moments that require clarity. This is not weakness. This is a highly sophisticated self-protection mechanism doing exactly what it was designed to do, keeping you inside the parameters of what the framework considers safe. The repair, therefore, is not more discipline. It is not a better morning routine or a stricter accountability system or a more aggressive productivity stack. Those things have their place, but they are downstream tools. The upstream work, the work that actually changes the trajectory, is examining the framework itself. Asking which beliefs about yourself are creating the friction. Identifying the identity that is pulling against the goal. Understanding the emotional logic of the resistance rather than simply trying to overpower it. Because you cannot outmuscle a framework with effort. You have to change what the framework believes is true. There is a fundamental difference in how people relate to their own lives, and it is not a difference of talent or ambition or work ethic. It is a difference of orientation. Most people are passengers inside their own existence, not because they are weak or unconscious or somehow less than, but because no one ever showed them that another orientation was available. They were trained from birth to respond to what the environment demands, to adapt to the expectations of whoever is loudest in the room, to measure themselves against external metrics they never chose, to optimize their behavior for approval they never stopped to decide they actually wanted. The passenger reacts. The passenger adapts. The passenger works incredibly hard within a structure they never questioned, and then wonders why the destination keeps feeling wrong. The architect operates from a different premise entirely. The architect asks a question that most people never get around to asking because they are too busy responding to everything around them. What is the framework I am currently running? Where did it come from? And does it actually produce the life I want, or the life someone else decided I should want? That question sounds simple. It is not simple. It requires a level of stillness that most people find deeply uncomfortable, because stillness removes the noise that keeps the hard questions from rising to the surface. It requires honesty about the gap between the life being lived and the life that feels true, a gap that is painful to look at directly. And it requires the willingness to consider that the problem is not out there in the circumstances, but in here, in the operating system, in the invisible architecture that has been generating the output all along. The shift from passenger to architect does not happen in a single moment of inspiration. Inspiration is cheap and temporary. The shift happens through a sustained, repeated practice of catching yourself reacting and asking, is this reaction mine, or is it the framework's? Is this decision a genuine expression of who I am and what I value, or is it a conditioned response designed to maintain an identity that no longer serves me? Every time that question is asked seriously, not rhetorically, not performatively, but with real intention to hear the honest answer, the architecture shifts slightly. The framework loosens. A small degree of agency is recovered, and over time, those small recoveries compound into something that looks, from the outside, like a completely different life. The world does not reward reactors with peace, it rewards architects with it. Not because architecting is easier, it is categorically harder, at least at the beginning. But because a life designed from the inside out, built on frameworks you chose with full awareness, calibrated to values that are genuinely yours, creates a kind of stability that no external success can replicate. Passengers have good days and bad days based on what happens to them. Architects have a foundation that holds regardless. Every time you go looking for motivation, watching another high-energy video, reading another quote that makes your chest tighten with temporary purpose, waiting for the feeling of readiness to arrive before you begin, you are treating a symptom while the underlying condition goes completely unaddressed. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are data, not drivers. When you feel motivated, something in your environment or your thinking has temporarily aligned with your framework in a way that reduces internal friction. The path forward feels clear, the effort feels worth it, the identity of the person taking action feels available and real. That alignment produces the feeling you call motivation. But the feeling is the symptom of the alignment. It is not the cause of it. And this distinction changes everything. The problem with building your life around motivation is that motivation is volatile by design. It spikes in response to novelty and fades as novelty wears off. It surges when you make a public commitment and drops when the social pressure dissipates. It arrives when the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels bridgeable and vanishes the moment the work becomes harder than the feeling anticipated. Every person who has ever started a new goal with enormous energy and abandoned it weeks later did not fail because their desire wasn't real. They failed because they were using a temporary feeling as the engine for a permanent change. And temporary engines do not complete permanent journeys. The people who execute consistently, not perfectly, not effortlessly, but consistently, have solved a different problem. They have built frameworks where action is structural rather than emotional, where the question is not, do I feel like doing this today, but rather, what does the person I have decided to become do in this situation, regardless of how they feel about it? This is not about suppressing emotion or denying the reality of bad days. It is about understanding that identity precedes feeling in the architecture of behavior. When your framework carries a clear, stable identity, when the story of who you are is built around someone who does the work even in resistance, the feeling of motivation stops being the prerequisite and becomes instead the byproduct. You build, then you feel it, not the other way around. This is the inversion that separates the people who talk about changing from the people who actually change. The talkers are waiting for the feeling that will make the action feel justified. The builders have decided that the action is the justification, that showing up, especially when they don't want to, is the most direct proof available that they are the person they are trying to become. Stop waiting for the feeling, build the structure. The feeling is a reward for consistency, not a prerequisite for it. And once you understand that distinction at a cellular level, you stop outsourcing your momentum to something as unpredictable as how you feel on a Tuesday morning. The invisible framework is not abstract. It is not a philosophical concept that lives somewhere in the ether of self-improvement theory. It is made of specific, identifiable components that can be examined, questioned, and deliberately rebuilt. But only if you know what to look for. Because the reason most people never change at the level that actually matters is not that they lack effort or desire. It is that they are working on the symptoms without ever diagnosing the source. They are repainting the walls when the foundation is cracked. So here, as plainly as it can be said, is what the framework is actually made of. It begins with your beliefs about what you deserve. Not what you want. Wanting is easy and everyone wants more. But what you believe at the level beneath conscious thought that you are actually entitled to receive. Most people carry a deeply embedded conviction that they deserve approximately what they have already received, that the past is a reliable indicator of what they are worth, and this conviction acts as a governor on every decision, every risk, every relationship they are willing to enter. Beneath that sits identity, the story you have been telling about who you are, often built from the most painful or formative moments of your history, compressed into a narrative that explains your behavior and, in explaining it, perpetuates it. Identity is the most powerful component of the framework because it operates at the level of self-definition. You will consistently, unconsciously act in ways that are congruent with who you believe yourself to be, even when those actions work directly against what you say you want. Then there are your standards, the minimum you will accept from yourself without internal alarm. Not your aspirations, but your floor. People confuse these two constantly. Your aspirations describe the life you would like to have. Your standards describe the life you are actually willing to tolerate. And you will always, without exception, live at your standards, not your aspirations. Your environment adds another layer. The physical, social, and informational space you inhabit daily makes constant demands on your behavior without saying a word. An environment filled with people who normalize smallness will gradually normalize it in you, regardless of how strong your intentions are. And finally, your language. The specific words you use to describe your struggles, your setbacks, yourself, is not merely a description of your experience, but a construction of it. The words you use to talk about yourself become the walls of the container you live inside. Change one of these components deliberately, at the root, and your entire behavioral landscape begins to reorganize. Change all five, simultaneously, with full awareness of what you are doing and why, and you are not improving your life. You are redesigning the operating system that generates it. This is not a metaphor for motivation. This is the actual mechanism by which human lives are transformed at a depth that holds. There is a cost to not doing this work, not a vague, hypothetical cost that sits somewhere in a distant future, a real, measurable, compounding cost that is accumulating in your life right now, with every passing day that the invisible framework operates without examination. And this cost needs to be spoken about directly, without softening, because the self-improvement industry has made a profitable habit of being gentle about urgency, and gentleness about urgency has allowed a great many people to treat the most important work of their lives as something they will get to eventually. Here is how the cost compounds. At 25, running the wrong framework feels like a phase, like something that will naturally correct itself as life continues to unfold and experience accumulates. The gap between who you are and who you could be is real, but it is not yet wide enough to feel catastrophic. There is still the comfortable sense that time is on your side, that the changes will come, that something will click. At 35, the gap has widened. The patterns that were once fluid have begun to calcify. The beliefs have been reinforced by a decade of outcomes that were generated by those very beliefs. The identity has been told to itself so many times that it has started to feel like a permanent fact rather than a story that could be revised. The energy to question the foundation is harder to access because the framework has also shaped what feels worth the effort of questioning. And at 45, what began as a small drift from authenticity has become a chasm that most people no longer look at directly. Because looking at it directly at that stage requires confronting the weight of everything that was built on the wrong foundation. And that confrontation carries a grief that most people are not prepared for. Time does not heal a broken framework. This is the lie of passive optimism, the belief that growth is the default state of human beings. That if you simply continue existing, things will eventually sort themselves into something better. They won't. Not without deliberate intervention. Without conscious examination, time does not improve a framework, it deepens it. It makes the grooves more pronounced, it makes the automatic responses more automatic, the ceilings more familiar, the borrowed beliefs more firmly embedded in the architecture of who you believe yourself to be. Every day you do not examine the invisible structure running your life is another day it runs you further in a direction you did not consciously choose. That is not a dramatic statement made for effect, it is a factual description of how frameworks operate over time. The people who changed their lives at a foundational level did not do so because they found the perfect moment or the perfect circumstances. They did it because they reached a point of honest reckoning with the cost of not changing, and they decided the cost was finally, irrevocably too high to keep paying. Everything that has been said in this video arrives here, at this moment, at this specific fork in the road, that every person who genuinely engages with these ideas eventually reaches. And the fork is not complicated, even if navigating it is. There are two paths from this point. The first path is the one most people take because it is the easier path in the immediate term, even though it is the more expensive path in the long run. It is the path of returning to what you were already doing, better informed, perhaps more self-aware, carrying a few new concepts in your thinking, but ultimately continuing to optimize inside a framework you did not choose, working harder within walls you never built, chasing ceilings you inherited from people who themselves never broke through them. This path is not shameful, it is deeply human. The gravitational pull of the familiar is one of the most powerful forces in existence, and most people underestimate it precisely because they cannot feel it pulling. It simply feels like normal life. The second path is narrower and significantly harder at the entrance, though it opens into something the first path never reaches. It begins with a single act of genuine honesty, not the performed honesty of self-improvement content, where you admit your flaws in a safe, socially acceptable way and are rewarded with validation. Real honesty, the kind that looks directly at the framework operating your life and asks, without flinching, what is this actually built from? What do I actually believe about myself beneath the story I perform for others? What ceilings am I living under that were never mine? What contract am I honoring that I never agreed to? What identity am I protecting that is costing me the life I actually want? Here is the specific action, not a vague suggestion, an actual assignment with a timeline, because vague suggestions are how good intentions become nothing. Write down the 5 components of your framework: your beliefs about what you deserve, your current identity story, your real standards versus your stated aspirations, the 3 most powerful environmental influences shaping your behavior daily, and the language you most frequently use to describe yourself when things go wrong. Write them down with brutal honesty, not with the version you would share publicly, but with the version that is actually true. Then, for each one, ask a single question. Did I choose this, or was it chosen for me? And if it was chosen for me, does it serve the life I want, or the life someone else decided I should have? This is not homework designed to produce a feeling of productivity. This is the beginning of the only kind of change that actually holds, the kind that starts in the architecture rather than in the behavior. The behavior is downstream, the architecture is the source, and the framework is already running. The only question that remains, the only question that has ever really mattered, is whether you are going to let it run you for another year, another decade, another lifetime, or whether you are going to do the rare and difficult and genuinely transformative thing. Look at it clearly, decide what belongs to you and what doesn't, and begin, deliberately and without apology, to build something that is actually yours.